In this screencast, I'll be demonstrating the use of macros in Excel. And macros are just shortcuts that you can use to perform one step or multiple steps, something specific that you need to do repeatedly is when you would use a macro. If you're just doing something one time, then a macro is not really that useful. If you do something every day or every week, then a macro can come in handy. So, and by the way, there's no use of macros on any of the assignments for this course. This is just a bonus material that someone requested I do. So if you have any questions on this, by all means, feel free to add to the discussion in D2L, or if you would like other demonstrations, you can request those there as well. So what I have on the screen should look familiar to you. A list of products that have been ordered, and you can see it's a pretty lengthy list. We're going over 2,000 lines. So let's say that we wanted to be able to print this list out, and let's take a look at the print preview. So it's 132 pages. So let's change it to landscape, and then we'll force it to be just one page wide. And now we've got it down to 40 pages. Let's change the margin to narrow. Okay, and that actually increased it to 42 pages. Let's do custom margin and okay, 37 pages. But still, if somebody printed this out and it doesn't show up that well on the screen, it'd be still hard to read. And so let's do something here. What I would like to do, and maybe some of you have been around long enough to remember reports called green bar reports, is I would like to, let me make that a little smaller. I want to fill in, say, every 5 rows with a green background. So we'll just pick a color here like this, and then skip 5 rows that are going to be white, and then do 5 rows. And there's nothing magic about 5 rows. I'm just picking that, and you can see I want to do this over and over and over again. Okay, well, I don't want to do that 500 times to get through this whole list, skipping 5 rows and whatever. So this is what I'm going to use a macro for. But you can see that just adding that a little bit can make this report already seem more readable. And that's why we used to use green bar reports and paper that had the green bars already printed on it. But we can mimic that in Excel. And so to start with, to develop a macro, the easiest way to develop a macro is to begin by recording the macro. And we do that on, I always lose it here, on the View tab. You see over here on the right side there's a thing called macros. And so if we click that arrow there, we can view macros or we can record macros. Okay, so let's record a macro. And when we record a macro, we can assign a shortcut key to it, like Control J, let's say, and if we wanted to, but I'm not going to assign a shortcut key. Let's just call this green bar 1. You can store macros in the workbook that you're working in, or sometimes it's beneficial to store them in a special macro workbook. Depends on if you're going to be using this particular macro in multiple workbooks or not. If we're only going to use it in this file, then it's fine to store the macro in this file. So that's what we'll do here. Okay, so as soon as I click OK, now we are recording the macro. And so then I can say, okay, turn this green. Whatever I do, it's recording right now. Skip 5 rows, and then turn this one green, and skip 5 rows and turn this section green, and so on. And now if I go up to the macros and I stop recording, okay, now we've got, if we look in View Macros, we've got this macro called green bar 1. So I'm going to undo these changes. And now if I go up and run that macro, let's see, View Macros. If I view it and then run it, it'll do what I just did before and fill in those green bars. Now the problem is that no matter where I'm at on this worksheet, if I run that macro, it will always color those exact cells green. So even if I'm down here on row 79 and I run the macro, it always colors those exact same cells green. And that's because we used absolute references when we recorded this macro. So what I'm going to do now is you'll see this third option under macros is to use relative references. So I'm going to click that first before I record the macro. And then let's remove all of the background, the fill. And now let's record the macro again. Oops. Okay, view, and that use relative references. You can barely see it, but that button is depressed, so it stayed there, stayed pushed. So now we'll do record macro. We'll call this green bar 2, also stored in this workbook. And so what this will do is now this is a relative reference macro. And so we'll do the exact same thing that we did before. Actually, I didn't skip 5 rows that time. Okay, get the idea. And then we'll put the thing right there. We'll go to view, and this time we'll stop recording. And now if I take off those highlights, and if I do view macros, and this time we run green bar 2, you'll see it looks like it does exactly the same thing that it did before, but it puts these it selects the cell A33 this time. And now if I go run the macro again, view macros, green bar 2, it'll start at that point and put the green bar in. Okay, so that's a little more helpful. Now let's go to view macros, and let's put a shortcut in there. Oops, I don't want to do that just yet. View macros, green bar 2, I think it's under options. So we'll call that Control J. Okay, Control Shift J actually, because I held the Shift key when I did that. So Control Shift J will run this macro. Okay, so let's go back to the top. I'll do Control Shift J, and if I keep doing that, and if I, in fact, if I just hold that down, you'll see that it'll keep going through. Let me make this a little bigger so you can see. Keep going through the entire worksheet and doing every 5 rows, making a macro, or running the macro, and then going 5 rows and stopping after the last section of green bar. And so I could very easily, in a matter of seconds, go through the entire worksheet putting green bars in all the way to the end of my selection. Okay, so that's another way to kind of speed up your work. Now let's go take these green bars off again here. I gotta go find where I ended. Now where the real power of macros comes in is if you get a little bit into inserting and writing the code behind the macros. So let's go to the view menu and let's look at that. Let's look at the code that's behind that green bar 2. So we'll do edit, and I need to make this a little smaller so that it fits on your screen. And if you've worked in Visual Basic before, you'll recognize kind of the language that's used here, and it's mostly pretty user-friendly. So what this is saying is that the first thing that the macro does is it selects from cell A1 to K5, and then this is where it's turning the background green. Okay, then it goes down. Guess this goes down 10 rows and over 0 columns, and selects another range and turns it green, and then goes down 11 rows and 0 columns and turns another range green, and so on, and then at the end goes down 10 columns. So I might have had an error in there. Let's let's go back to Excel here, because you notice it went down. Okay, so we've got 5 rows green, 5 rows white. Yep, see, I've got 6 rows that are green here. And so the reason that I know that I had an error is because this went down 11 rows from the last spot. That really should have been 10. So I can just change that and say, you know, make that 10 instead. Go up here and save it. To save macros in Excel, you need to change the file extension of the workbook. It can't end in .xlsx. It has to end in .xlsm, and that's a macro-enabled workbook. So if we do save as, and then I will save this as a macro-enabled workbook, and now we can save the macro. Okay, so we'll go back and hit save. And now if I run this time, let's turn these white again. Control-Shift-J. Now I should have 5 rows of green, 5 rows of white. Nope, I've still got 6 rows of green there. So let's take a look here. 10, 10. Oh, this should be K5, not K6. That's where I was off. Okay, so getting some real world experience here in how these things work. Control-Shift-J. 5 green, 5 white, 5 green, 5 white, and so on. Okay. So that's what this macro is doing. Now, if we wanted to, you'll notice that from this section here, let me just highlight this. This section here is exactly the same as this next section here. Okay, which then is exactly the same as most of this section here. So basically what we're doing is we're repeating the same steps over and over. And so something else that we could do is we could set up a loop. Okay, and this is where the programming comes into play. And so you could say we're going to put a loop statement here at the end, and we're going to put a do at the top. So what this will do is it runs through this and then it loops again, and we don't want this to loop infinitely or else we'll have problems. And so what we can do is we can say, let's say we want this to loop, let's say 10 times. Okay, so we could say let's do n equals 1 up here, and then loop, and then we'll say n equals n plus 1, and then we'll say loop until n equals 10. Okay, so we're setting the value of n equal to 1, and then now when it gets to this point after the first time, it's going to be 2, and then 3, and it's going to keep looping 4, 5 until it gets to 10, and then it's going to exit the loop. So let's go see what that does. So that should run through the macro 10 times, or maybe 9 times. I guess it depends on, I'd have to think about how that works, but Control-Shift-J again should do it. And now you see that we've got green bars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 green bars and 9 white bars, and then the macro stopped where it was before. And so then another thing that I've used before is, instead of looping just 10 times, is you could say look in cell A1 after you've run this, and see if cell A1 is blank, and if cell A1 is blank, then stop. So instead of looping until n equals 10, you could set it up to loop once there's no more data found. And so then no matter how long, let's say you've got a 5,000 row report 1 month, you could run it and would do the green bars on all 5,000 rows. If you've got a 2,000 row report the next month, you could run it and it would stop after 2,000 rows, and so on. But this is where the power of macros really can come into play. And things that I've seen this used for are repetitive tasks. Like let's say that you collect sales and expenses information and profit. Maybe you do it each month, okay? But you've got 5 stores, okay? You've got a store in Maple Grove, and you've got a store in Woodbury, and one in Minneapolis, and one in Eagan, and let's say one in Minnetonka, okay? And each of those store managers sends you their column, okay? Well, what you could do then is, instead of opening the Maple Grove file and copying and pasting the Maple Grove stuff, and then opening the Woodbury file and copying and pasting it, is you could, the first month, you just save all of those files with a standard name, and then you record a macro. And then every month after that, you just run the macro once you've saved those files with a standard name. And you can even set up macros, say in your email client, like in your Outlook, so that it will save the files when they come in from the store managers, let's say. And so it doesn't seem very hard to, open Maple Grove and copy it and paste it here, and open Woodbury and copy and paste it here. But imagine if you've got 20 stores and this is 100 rows long or something like that. So you need some control over it, because you need to develop a system where you're going to be saving, say, with standard names and things like that. And you don't want somebody inserting rows and that kind of stuff into a spreadsheet, because that could kick it off if one manager puts an extra row in or something. But very powerful stuff. Then when you get the files, you click a button and boom, it goes through it, and you're done. So lots of great things that macros can be used for. And this is just scratching the surface, but I want to show you how to get started. And then I would just recommend using your favorite search engine like Google when you get stuck, to look for, how do I create loops? How do I check cell contents to see if it's blank or not? Just experiment around, record some different macros and see what this Visual Basic code looks like when you've recorded some things. Write some formulas and do one of the earlier assignments and turn the record macro on, and then go look at the code, and you'll be able to see kind of what it's doing throughout the process, and then use pieces of that in your own custom macros. And that's where the real power lies. And this same kind of thing that I've shown you in Excel, you can do in Word or Access, other applications, Microsoft applications, or even some non-Microsoft applications, all work very similarly. And if you can learn to do this, as I mentioned before, it's very valuable for an employer to hire someone that has excellent Excel skills. If you can do some macros and some Visual Basic type stuff, you will be that much more special as an employee, and the opportunities for you to advance or to get qualify for certain jobs and roles and things will be much better than for someone that doesn't understand the power of these things. Very small percentage of people that use Excel well know how to do this macro coding. So just play around with it. And if you have questions, like I said before, or you have an example you want me to run through, you've got a specific need, just post that on D2L and we can discuss it there, and I could maybe record another screencast even if the need arises. So good luck to you as always, and please ask any questions online if you have any.